planning department, and I want to thank all of you for joining the meeting today. And I especially want to send out a thanks to many of the community leaders who've been so actively involved and engaged in the development of the UDO with SNAP and TAG, and we're just very grateful for the time and attention that has been given to this this proposal. I also want to thank Harriet for her diligence, just looking over the work that she has done over the last few months has been remarkable. And so thank you, Harriet. I think that when we first began to work in Wedgewood-Houston and Chestnut Hill in 2018 or thereabouts, even at that time, there was an interest in developing a UDO for this area, which has some of the most important and interesting sort of fabric in the city, just from a built environment perspective. These are special neighborhoods, and we want to make sure that we create tools that are appropriate and help guide development in a way that we think can support your goals. And so anyway, it's been interesting. It's been 2 or 3 years, I think, in the making, and this is a step in sort of the community planning process that we have undertaken with this neighborhood and with these neighborhoods. And so anyway, I'm happy to, I read through the emails from last week. And William, I have not had time. I just got your email this morning, so I have not had time to review all of the details of the issues that you want to discuss. But my goal for this meeting is just to hear what the remaining concerns are and talk through those, and then have sort of a productive discussion here and at the Planning Commission. So with that, Harriet, if you want to take it away and sort of moderate the meeting, that would be great. I think we've got an hour, so I look forward to the conversation today.
Sure. Dante, would you please unmute William Solomon?
Hey guys, can y'all hear me? Okay, I appreciate you guys setting this all up. One thing that may make this a better meeting is if we actually unmute everybody. That's the one thing I feel like we've been missing the whole time as a conversation. I think there's a lot of people on here that want to speak. I don't want to do all the speaking. Hey,
William, you're not going to do all the speaking. We're going to call on folks. We've tried that twice, and it was really difficult because people were talking over one another unintentionally. They didn't mean to do that. We've tried it. Right after COVID, we tried lots of different ways to have different meeting types. We tried unmuting everybody. We tried small group sessions. Believe me, I know it's not perfect. I know it's not organic. We would rather be meeting in person as well, but I assure you, I don't want everyone interrupting one another. And that's sort of what happens, because it's hard to have visual and personal cues when you're all, I know it's frustrating. We don't like it either, but we've done lots of community engagement since COVID, so you'll just have to trust me on this one. If other folks will raise their hand, I know it feels like camp, we'll call on you. That way you won't be interrupted. You'll have time to talk. Thank you. So go ahead, William.
Well, I guess to start, to me, we have an hour, so maybe we just start going through the agenda a little bit. And then I know there's quite a few items where different people are going to want to chip in. I've put this together just from all the input I've gotten. I think just to say on the front end, Harriet's done a great job. She's hosted meetings. She's heard us. The biggest issue everybody has is the lack of conversation, where we can send an email, we can have an opinion, and the response is like, oh, thanks, we'll get back to you. And maybe somebody will get back to us, or maybe we'll get a draft of a UDO 4 or 5 days before it goes to the Planning Commission. It's just, there's a lot of things I think that could ebb and flow and work together and compromise and come up with solutions that really work for the neighborhood. and I know a lot of it's COVID, and I know a lot of it's how much is on, Harriet's plate. But I believe that's one of the strongest concerns I've heard from everybody is that it's not conversational, it's not fluid. And when we went through the planning study in 2019, that was incredible. That was one of the best run processes I've ever participated in. And I think everybody went through that, and then now we're experiencing the COVID version. And it's pretty tough to go through it this way without figuring out who's making decisions, why aren't some things being heard, why are some things being heard. It's just missing the whole conversation.
So William, we, like you, much prefer and enjoy having person-to-person meetings. But this department has to continue to do our work serving the community and fulfilling our responsibilities. And we have worked just as hard as we can to sort of expand the tools and the ability of folks to talk through issues. But I've got to say, when I look through the list of times that Harriet met with you individually and responded on an individual basis, I'm not sure I understand, really understand the comment. And,
Okay.
we're not going to agree on all planning and technical issues. So we're not going to, that's not, we're trying to listen to lots of different constituencies and lots of different individuals on this UDO who all are expressing a different point of view. And so part of what we're trying to accomplish is hearing that feedback and then giving our best professional sort of opinion about how to move forward and appropriately address that feedback, but also meet broader planning goals. And so that's sort of what we're trying to do. Just because we don't agree doesn't mean the process isn't transparent or that in some way it's broken because we're having to do it remotely. So
Right.
I would just suggest, we're all having to work through how to do this work during COVID. And I appreciate all of the feedback from the community. And so why don't you go ahead, so just so we make sure we can hear from everybody. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. So would you like to get started with, why don't you list out the top couple of issues that are of concern to you, and then we can productively respond.
Okay. And just in response to what you just said, I completely understand. I do think the disconnect is just the conversational piece. It's one thing to send an email or have a conversation, but when the response is thanks for the input, it's not a conversation. I'm hoping everybody else on here, this isn't me. Harriet's talked to me plenty, but this is going to echo through everybody on this list. So don't focus this on me, focus on everybody else on here, because I'm lucky enough to at least been able to talk to her. Other people may feel differently.
Okay, William, what concerns do you have so I can have a conversation with you about those?
Great. Okay. So on our agenda, I think number one was just to talk about the intent of the UDO in general and make sure we're even on the same page about that based on the planning study. I think that might be part of the issue where there's a disconnect, is that what most of the people on this that aren't working for planning right now view the UDO or the planning policy was in 2A, which is Merritt Southgate, that it was supposed to continue the development pattern. It's the only residential district that doesn't mention scale, existing housing stock, preservation. None of those terms are in there. And that was very on purpose coming out of that planning study. That's the conversation we all had. We all left very comfortable with it. And a lot of these terms are in the UDO. Some things should not be applied to Merritt Southgate that are. And I think that's the disconnect. It's some of these things are grouped over the full, they're blanketed over, and they don't match Merritt Southgate.
So can you just give me one very simple example of how that in application, how that in your view is affecting the UDO? I mean,
Yeah,
what's
so
your,
one example is Ryan Long, who owns a house at 565 Moore Avenue. He's got a Victorian house. It's probably one of the oldest in the neighborhood. He's put many years in renovating it and updating it. He's got a 35-foot house next door to him, and he's got a church that's multiple stories across the street. His is one story. So in Merritt Southgate, he's going to build a one-story house behind his one-story house because his height has to be the same, but he's going to be surrounded by 2 to 3 story, maybe 4-story houses. And so one of his big issues is he put all this effort into preserving something, and now he's going to be the only one-story house. He's going to be closer to 2-story houses than his 20-foot away back house that's also 1-story.
Okay, and so what's the resolution that you would propose to this particular issue?
Let's see. Well, I think on the front end, I can answer that, but we have the agendas kind of laid out so we can get into the specifics later. But
well, I want to have you're asking for a more fluid conversation, so I want to respond and get all this on the table so I can work with you and hear what the issue is. So help me understand what the.
Okay. So then, on page 18 of the UDO, height is measured from the natural grade at the front of the property. So, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. So, find that one. Okay, I'm sorry. Page 16, rear structure massing and rear structure height. So height is measured from the top. Maybe that's not it. I'm confusing myself. Anyway, it's somewhere in the UDO that there's a restriction that the back house may not be taller than the front house.
Yeah, I think, that's interesting. That's not just an issue in Wedgewood-Houston, but in a lot of neighborhoods and communities in the city. And something we at the department sort of grapple with. I mean, typically, just from an urban design quality perspective, the structure at the street tends to take precedence. I mean, there's all kinds of, I think if you look at precedents, not only in Nashville, but in like southern cities, it's pretty common for the rear structure to be slightly smaller scale. And so, and I think that has to do with the relationship of the street. That has to do with all kinds of things that are pretty basic in the kind of the terms of urban design. But having said that, I mean, if there's a individual who's worked really hard to protect a home, and I think that's really exciting. That's one of the things that we want to see. Then that's something that we can look at in terms of a particular case. But just as a general principle, I will tell you one anecdote in Nashville. The thing that I hear more about from residents, community leaders, architects all over the city, not just in Wedgewood-Houston, the land use category that I hear the most about, it's not industrial, it's not mixed use in neighborhoods, it's residential character. And of that discussion, I would say one of the top issues has to do with the height and scale of sort of accessory buildings or other buildings adjacent to single family or homes or duplexes, because I think there is a sense that maybe the scale of these has not been thoughtful enough. I don't know the particulars of this proposal, but I'm just having a conversation with you about why that's something we might consider.
Yeah, the thing on this one is why we're bringing it up is in District 2A, it does not mention scale, and it does not mention existing housing stock, and it does not mention preservation. The other districts do. So we're trying to get that out of this district. And that's where on here, the people, I mean, it's Jeff Gall, Jeremy Kelton, Clay Kelton, Donald Jenkins, Eric Malo, Moyo, Kyle. This isn't just a me issue. This is.
I'm not suggesting it is, but you're the one talking. So let's just have a conversation about that. So I think what's interesting is the notion that now preservation is a loaded term. It's kind of like sustainability, right? I mean, it's like you can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different folks. But I guess the question is there a difference between urban design quality and how we want neighborhoods to evolve and community character? I mean, I've never heard a neighborhood say that they don't want community character to be contemplated in the planning for that area. So I'm just this is the first time I've ever heard a comment that we don't want community character as a goal. Is that really what you mean? I just want to help me understand.
That is what we left the 2019 planning study with. Yes, it is supposed to continue to evolve out of 2A. But does anybody else have their hand up? I would love to let some other people take over for a minute, just so it's not.
Oh, sure, absolutely. But Harriet, Joni, did y'all have any thoughts about that? I mean, would it really have been a goal in the policy document not to have any kind of aspirations for the character of an area or for this particular sub-district? What's your sense of this? I just want to make sure everyone is able to kind of have a conversation about sort of where our perspectives on this.
Sure.
Yeah, Lucy.
I mean, Joni, go ahead.
No, Harriet, please, you jump in.
So my understanding in reading the 2019 study is what we're kind of parsing here is the difference between context, an emphasis on maintaining the kind of existing context of the neighborhood, and just a general desire for urban design best practices or the things that create a positive sense of place or environment, community character. And from my understanding, William is right that in the 2019 study, when they talk about 2A, they don't talk about maintaining the existing context. And some of the other language that has been used is about, really basing the development in a gradual way that prioritizes the existing scale and that kind of thing. And but when we're talking about this northern part of Wedgewood-Houston, that area is already developed a lot, and so it makes sense to continue that development pattern. But to me, that is not the same thing as saying we're going to let all urban design kind of best practices go out the window. So I think there's a little bit of a differentiation there. That, I don't know, maybe needs to be parsed out a little more.
We have goals for all of our residential areas. I mean, we have goals that we would want any neighborhood in Nashville to want to accomplish based on lots of kind of feedback from residents, but also just to your point, best practices. But William, to your point, let's call on someone else and get them in here.
One example real fast.
Who's talking here?
It's William. So I wanted to point out an example real fast.
Hurry, because we've got a lot of other folks who'd like to speak.
Southgate Station was an SP that was approved in 2A, and the entire project is 2 to 3 stories. And we preserved one single story stone house, and that was fully supported by the neighborhood. So it's one historic stone house with 45 2 to 3 story structures around it. And that was the development pattern that's been established. And that's kind of what we're using when we talk about this, that it's okay. And
did the planning department support that project?
It's already been built. Yeah.
Right. So, and the planning department supported that. So
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So we tend to be pretty flexible, and we'll look at the context and figure out if something works. We'll make it work. I know the project, and I think we supported it. So, okay, I saw Eric Mallow, who had am I pronouncing your name correctly? I saw
It's
some.
Malo, but that's
Oh,
fine.
I'm sorry. Forgive me. Eric Malo. Hi.
Hi, Lucy, and Harriet, everybody else. Thanks for doing this, putting it together. Just to continue with some of what William had brought up in that specific case, I think I hear what you're saying as far as urban planning best practices, and I think we're in such a unusual and probably unique situation with the neighborhood and the way the process is going that it brings a lot of, I would say there's confusion about a lot of these tools. And I don't know that, I know that I don't have the answers on it, some of these things. And so whatever I say, I don't want to come off as though I do, right? And I think some of the others feel that way too. With that house and a few others similar to that, some of the challenges that we see is that there have already been quite a few houses on the street that have been torn down and new houses built that are meeting the current entitlements. And so there's a case like that where a homeowner has done a really good job, but now sees that he won't be able to do what others have done. With the exception, and this is a fear that I have, he could tear the existing house down and build two that are 45 feet tall, if I understand. And there may be some details in there that would not allow that. But so the challenge that people see and is that as a developer, and I don't know his intent and his goals, but our neighborhood is largely being changed by developers, people who own multiple parcels and are building, which is different than a historic district where it's almost entirely homeowners, I would say. And so you have these urban design guidelines that work well when it's one-off projects that a homeowner wants to do. But here what we're seeing is many people own, in that example, he may want to act as a developer on his own parcel. And so that may be a homeowner doing that. But then we have other owners who might own 2 lots or 10 lots or even more. And so when some of these guidelines are set up, it seems to be with the standard like homeowner kind of general organic growth in mind. That's not what we've seen here. And so there's a disconnect, I think. And one tiny point on that project, which I think applies to others, is the measurement of the height of the rear structure. And in general, a lot of the measurements of the heights and so forth, it's being done by the height at the front property line instead of at the height of the front of the structure, which to my knowledge is typical in other overlays and things like that. And so that adds an extra burden on any of these projects because you're dealing with the topography.
Eric, can I ask you a clarifying question? I just want to make sure I'm understanding you. Thank you for those comments. That was really helpful. So if I'm hearing you, let's say you have a home that has an existing structure and maybe it's smaller in scale, but it is a contributing, not historic necessarily, but it's a character feature of the neighborhood and something we may want to retain as a community, let's say hypothetically. And am I hearing you say that you're concerned that our standards will incentivize the demolition of that structure so that a property owner could do both at a taller scale? Did I say that correctly? Is that what
Yes, I believe so. I am
Okay.
fairly worried about that because most of the building in the neighborhood is done by developers. And
Right.
not to speak against developers, we have a bunch on the call and I talk with a lot of them closely. I respect what William and Dwayne are doing. I'm not a developer, but I'm an architectural designer. And so I'm seeing that I agree with the logic of the UDO, but what personally I'm seeing is that the logic of a developer is coming in and saying, well, what's the return on investment? And if I need to maintain a low structure in the back, then it's actually incentivizing a developer to tear down houses and then therefore to build more bigger structures.
I appreciate that. I mean, you're right. It is really hard As a state and a city, we value property rights, and we deal with this a lot with our landscape ordinances, right? And how we handle the residential sort of development requirements there, right? Because we don't want to be in a position of saying you have to keep this structure. But I think, to your point, a lot of what makes the city and this neighborhood so unique are some of those existing homes. So let me ask before we move on, Joni or Harriet, did y'all have any thoughts about what Eric raised? I think that's a good question and an important one. So we don't want unintended consequences of our standards. Any thoughts there from you?
Sure, Lucy. This is Joni. I'll just chime in here for a second. I think one of the benefits of a UDO as a tool is the modifications process. And I think the difficult thing from our standpoint and what we're trying to do with creating a UDO is to create standards that will appropriately apply to the vast majority of properties, and that there will always be a handful of outliers, whether that's for retaining an existing structure or a particular topographic situation, whatever that may be, where a modification is warranted. Everyone can see that it's necessary, and that strict adherence to a standard would actually result in a worse situation. So with the UDO, we have that ability to consider modifications based on site-specific issues. So I would just remind everybody that that is a really important aspect of the UDO, so that we can think about the standards as they apply to the vast majority of existing properties, new construction, whether that's a single-family homeowner that's trying to do something different to their property, or a developer who's looking at building a more substantial project. And remember that we have that clause of the modification for site-specific issues. So I think we're at the point where a lot of these concerns are being raised for specific properties, and that's good and thoughtful on everybody's behalf. I would just maybe ask us to think about how these standards are appropriate to the vast majority of properties that will be within the UDO.
So Joni, I'm hearing you say planning knows that there are always going to be outliers that we need to give special consideration to. I think the department has a proven track record of being pretty thoughtful when we get modification requests in, to make sure we want the best outcome, right? That's our goal. And so, okay, well, Harriet, let's go on to the next person, and I'll come back to you, Eric, and see if that made any sense, but I want to make sure that your neighbors and colleagues have an opportunity to weigh in here. So we
Sure.
can come back and see if you thought if that resonated at all.
Yeah, thank you. Can I turn it over to Michael Hendricks, I believe, if his hand's up? There's a desire to get back to some of the points on the agenda, and he wanted to speak.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. I'm a neighbor in Hamilton. For work, I study housing policies across the country. And I just want to commend all the engagement, including today. I want to speak as someone who completely supports the UDO's goals and trying to help the little details ensure we meet those goals and align with the 2019 planning study. And I know, and Harry's been great about this, explaining how what we're doing is also looking at the example from other cities and how they've made missing middle work and some of their urban design best practices. So I just wanted to quickly share some of their examples and lessons learned, because I think it could be helpful. And in my senses, we're pointing in absolutely the right direction, and with, I think, a little bit more flexibility in the UDO, especially for Merritt Southgate. I think we can get more of that missing middle too. So I just wanted to run through a couple of little details that I think in aggregate may make a big difference to making missing middle pencil out. And as kind of Eric mentioned, rather than making folks just give up and build a big pricey home and, move on, especially in Merritt Southgate. So I looked at Oregon. Oregon's developing a model code for missing middle. Portland has its residential infill project, Better Housing by Design. Cincinnati's code, which is a model by the creators of missing middle housing. Seattle's residential small lot, Austin's experience. So I'll just run through a couple of things real quick, if that's all right. So
Sure.
on setback, one thing that may be helpful is setting setback maximums for the neighborhood that we want to be really, really walkable, like Merritt Southgate, and maybe even encourage shorter setbacks in areas that might become neighborhood centers, like was mentioned in the 2019 planning study. Cincinnati has a 15-foot setback max in their T4 neighborhood. Portland's R2, which has the same density as the area that we're looking at, has a 10-foot minimum setback and 20-foot maximum. Same for Portland. That's something that you may or may not get in Merritt Southgate, for instance, as the language currently is for the setback. Another on building space between front and back houses. Oregon is looking at 5-foot interior setbacks. Missing middle designers recommend 10 to 20. I think we'll be on the high end of that. Driveways too. One thing that you see, Oregon's looking at driveway maximum rather than a range of what's acceptable. So, maybe saying a maximum of 18 feet or a maximum of 16 feet. My house has 12 feet, which would not be allowed. There's a lot of other homes in this neighborhood that have 12 feet. I know the concern is with Public Works, but Public Works has also allowed a lot of these 12-foot driveways to work out. And of course, a 12-foot driveway maybe makes a little bit more house possible to build a few more units, maybe pencil out in the aggregate. Lot frontage too, I know that's something that we've talked a lot about. Cincinnati's T5 allows between 150 to 200 feet max widths. The author of Missing Middle recommends only lot width minimums. Seattle has no max lot widths. It seemed like, we're getting there, but maybe 150 feet is actually kind of reasonable if you look at some of the other neighborhoods we look to for examples. Primary entrance, maybe shorter minimums, more flexibility in placement. Oregon's looking at an 8-foot standard, flexibility in how doors are placed. But that's kind of a small one. And then height, maybe just more generous measurement terms for the rear structure. Portland looks at measuring height from the lowest point near the house. I have a couple of examples I'm happy to share, but just allowing a little more flexibility in how you measure height could allow a little bit more adaptability. And then just two broad big picture points. So overall, I think you see from the example of Austin that they're looking to an incentive-based approach rather than a restriction-based approach. And just saying we explicitly say we do just frankly want to make it easier for developers to build 3 to even, this is a quote from one of their urban planners, 3 to 10 dwelling units to get through the development review process. Kind of what you've already said with the UDO, but how can we make more of these pencil out is kind of the overriding assumption, because otherwise all these other single family homes are frankly easier to pencil out a lot of times. So how can we make sure that the incentive is there? And they also mentioned ideally fewer reasons to go back to planning for modifications in the first place. Fewer reasons to make you have to go through that process is probably better. And ultimately, I'm encouraged because Austin's reforms attempts have foundered without the sort of support that I think you're ultimately hearing on this call, that we all are on board with the UDO's goals and missions. We're just trying to say, can we add a little bit more flexibility so we meet that goal? Austin didn't have that, and they've been failing for years to get what we're looking to get in Wedgewood-Houston. And so just overall, I think with these sort of recommendations, looking at lessons from model cities and states, I think we can welcome some more of this change and more of the missing middle in the area that we're looking at, and maybe even especially at Merritt Southgate. If even just a little more flexibility for Merritt Southgate, we may end up just seeing that we'll end up finding more housing choice that's attainable for more people in Merritt Southgate. Maybe we can, over time, take some of those lessons and apply that to other areas in Wedgewood-Houston and Chestnut Hill. But at the very least, I hope that these takeaways from other jurisdictions are helpful to you for the whole area that we're looking at.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. And we do want to find ways to encourage the development of missing middle housing. And to your point, it's not like a chemistry experiment. You wish you could just kind of say, okay, and then it will form here. I think you're right. It does. It feels almost more like an art form, right, than a exact science. The one thing I'll say, just on the flexibility side, you're talking in general principle, so I hope you'll forgive me if I offer a couple of kind of more general principle type feedback to that, which is just food for thought for you to sort of think about as we move forward. Our city has experimented in some neighborhoods with really pushing the public works standards to their absolute edge. And sometimes it works. And when I say pushing the public works standards to their edge, meaning saying to them, come on, we want you to relax a little bit. We want to encourage and promote flexibility. It can result in good projects and good flow. It can also result in neighborhoods that have a lot of stormwater issues and other kinds of challenges that we're trying to learn from. And so, there are areas, are you familiar off of Charlotte? There's that sort of very hilly neighborhood. I can't think of there's a lot of new 1 and 2 families back there. And that's an area where we sort of said to Public Works, we want the narrowest driveways. We want to really sort of push you on your standards for alleys. And we have seen a lot of challenges there with respect to the function of the area. It's everything from trash pickup to very difficult stormwater problems. And so I know that's not as interesting as a sort of, and maybe as a policy matter, your response to me is that should matter less. If we're able to accomplish these housing goals, that matters less. But I would put that on the table for you to think about, because, this is an area that, that has some environmentally sensitive resources that we need to think about. And so I would just suggest that be a factor in your thinking as well. So, Harriet, you want to help me? Who else? There's some others with their hands up.
Sure. Can we, Doncheck, will you unmute Jeremy Felton, please?
Good morning.
Thank
Good morning.
you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Yes, good. Hey, thank you guys so much for organizing this time. I wanted to get to a maybe one of the specific points, I guess, just to ask about and see if I could understand it better. I'm thinking about the driveways situation in the current draft. I'm speaking off of page 12 of the UDO. It seems like the UDO is requiring 16 to 18 feet wide driveways, at least for the first 20 to 40 feet. And I think that's a pretty drastic difference from the past. And without with most of the lots in the neighborhood being 50 feet wide, it seems like that's going to eat up, 35, 40% of the lot, the front facade anyway. Is that the intention? And it would make it, in my opinion, if that is, it would make it really difficult to build on the remaining, to build houses with the side setback on the other side. It would just require building really narrow houses, which that may be part of the point, but I would love to hear any explanation, or if there's any ideas on that.
Sure. Jeremy, I can jump in on that one. So this is a public works standard, I guess. So public works usually, and if you go to Metro Code 13.12.110, you'll see that they, for duplex and triplex properties, they require 15 to 24 feet in width, and they consider multifamily anything 2 or greater. So we had several discussions with them because, echoing your concerns, we think that's a little excessive for a 50-foot lot frontage, that half of it would have to be your driveway. So we worked with them to try to get them to reduce it, and where we got was the 16 to 18 foot in width. And so, I mean, I understand from William's email and from others that maybe you guys have gotten them not to enforce that, but from just the perspective of what has to be in the UDO, we have to meet public works and fire standards and all of that. And so that is for duplex and triplex, and then for single family, it can be 12 feet, which is what this is also what public works is allowed. And I mean, if we wanted to go into a deeper discussion, I could talk to you, kind of tell you why public works, or how they conveyed that to us of why this is the requirement. But that is a standard that, at least in my perspective, I would also love to have reduced, but we were unable to do that in our talks with them.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. That's interesting. I mean, it seems like almost all the new construction in the last 10 years in the neighborhood, none of it's had 16-foot wide driveways. So that's going to be that'll be interesting to see how it's enforced, because that could shut everything down.
So to your point, Public Works is going to be at the Planning Commission meeting, and I think that's an important point that they're going to need to talk through. And the commissioners are made up of people who know planning and design issues really well. And so that's something that I think we're happy to raise in the presentation, and Public Works can try to I mean, I think it's important for all metro departments to be able to explain our standards in a public setting, and so we'll ask them to do that. And I think, to your point, sometimes departments are more comfortable, departments like Public Works that are health safety focused, right? They want to start from something that they know they think will work, and then step back from it. And it's imperfect. I mean, I kind of take your point. But maybe there's a way that we can get them. Let me give that some thought, because I understand that's a running issue, and I will reach out to their leadership as well. So thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Harriet, do you want to call on? It looks like there are a few other folks with hands up.
Sure, Dr. Will you unmute Dwayne Cuthbertson?
Hey guys, good morning.
Good morning, Dwayne.
I feel like I've been called down to the prices right now. I get to play. So first things, in the Q&A, maybe it's just my computer, but I can't see anybody else's comments or questions. I only see a history of my own. So I don't know if that's something on the moderator's end or if it's on mine and I'm just too dense to fix it, but I wanted to point that out. And then I've heard some of the discussion, and we're getting into some of the specific points, but I'm not sure that I heard maybe an agreement on the intent of at least this sub-district in terms of how we read the community plan and what prism or what lens we're looking through as we shape the UDO for this particular sub-district. And Eric touched on it, and I think others may have mentioned it, but this part of the neighborhood is kind of unique, especially when it comes to Nashville. You guys get hit over the head over and over about protect the neighborhood, And even before I started working in this neighborhood, we heard something different. You know, this neighborhood wanted to be more urban, wanted to be more walkable, was less concerned about traditional residential character. But it seems like there's a gap now with this UDO, at least a little bit, and that we have some that are saying, well, let's keep that pattern going. The pattern that we see, you know, we've seen built out in a lot of the SPs in this sub-district. We want a more urban, walkable pattern that includes a variety of housing types, and that's what we've gotten with those SPs. And I think that's still the general consensus in this neighborhood. You know, there may be a handful of others who are moving back toward the protect the neighborhood camp. If they're out there, you know, I have to admit that either I'm not hearing them or I've just not been involved in that conversation. So I wanted to bring this back to intent, and I think that, you know, some of us, at least, if not the majority of us, are saying we're less concerned about the traditional residential character, and we want our sub-district to be more urban, be more walkable, and the residential, or I should say the urban design principles that we're really concerned about are more form-based as you experience them at the street. You know, what's the pattern feel like as the public's going to experience it at the street, and beyond that facade, you know, how many units are back there? We don't really care. What's the building look like behind the front one? We're less concerned about that. How that plays out. And so that's kind of why I want to bring it back to intent is, are we looking at the Merritt Southgate subdistrict through the same lenses? You know, when a few of us are saying what we understand this subdistrict to want is maybe different than what you guys are looking at it.
So Dwayne, I have a couple of clarifying questions for you, okay?
Okay.
So when I look at the SPs that are within this sub-district, and there are plenty, I don't see standards that are, I don't see a built result that is dramatically non-compliant with the standards of this UDO, nor do I see a built environment that is completely hands-off, no requirements, no urban design standards that aren't mentioned in the policy. There are many standards embedded in those SPs that are never mentioned in the policy because they result in good urban design. Hold that in one hand. I'd love your comments on that. Where I see unfettered development is in the stuff that's happening in the base zoning, the base two-family zoning. So if you're going to use the SPs as your example of appropriate change in this neighborhood, great. Let's talk about what those SPs required. But if what you're really asking for is a UDO codification of the R6A zoning that you have today that would allow 3 units on a lot, say that. Those are two different things.
Okay, so the SPs, and we can spend time offline kind of analyzing them, but the SPs, I think setbacks are much closer to the street. These are corner lots, and you guys have provided the option of the major modification. So, you know, we have to go back in front of the Planning Commission, and it's a public hearing, and but they're much closer to the street than what this UDO allows by right. Some of the Southgate SPs, you know, the building heights in the back are, you know, potentially taller than the ones in the front. Again, we can go into the details, and I'm not asking for unfettered because character matters at the street. I'm just saying, I think what I'm saying is, are we still stuck on a few standards that come back to this traditional residential character, or, you know, are we pushing forward and trying to create a really flexible playing field that will incentivize, to Michael's point, incentivize folks to make that missing middle housing work on some of these smaller lots throughout the neighborhood. And I think some of us are saying we want an easier pathway, a cleaner pathway to some of the missing middle housing.
I don't think it's mutually exclusive, Dwayne. I think you can accomplish missing middle housing and do it in a way that meets common standards. So I think our goal is to create basic kind of urban design standards that are support a sense of place. I don't read this UDO, this portion of the UDO as anti-urban. You're sort of saying you want more urban area. We support that. We want walkable neighborhoods, and we want this area to be walkable. That doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with you that we shouldn't have urban design standards for the rear structures, for example. So I guess I'm not really following the discussion. I mean, I did look at the SPs last week, and many of them do include standards. I mean, maybe the setback is a little bit different, but those are site-specific proposals that we looked at for those particular projects. So that would be a little bit different, I think, in terms of the setback than creating an urban design standard or a UDO standard for a sub-district. So
yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that the UDO for the most part is on point. And so if my comments were taken as I don't like the UDO, I want you to rewrite it, that's not at all what I'm suggesting. I think we're there, but for just a small handful of points that, at least in our minds, leave us scratching our heads, and we hadn't been able to really have this fluid conversation about the whys, and so that maybe we understand it. And that's all I was getting at. Joni, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to attack the process or the product. I've got my 3 minutes of fame, and so I'm trying to get it all in.
Dwayne, no one's accusing you of doing anything. We're just trying to talk to you and hear what you're saying. Nobody's. We want to have that conversation too, so we can move forward. So I guess what I'm saying is, I guess hearing Joni's point or Joni's question to you, we're just trying to understand where you're coming from. I don't, the notion that having urban design standards is in some ways anti-urban or does not as walkable. I'm just trying to understand how the standards we've proposed would lead us, would lead you to have that question. And so I'm just trying to get to that. I'm trying to understand where you're coming from.
Okay, I know we're almost out of time, so I know others want to speak. Josh Baxter, I think, has wanted to speak. So I'll refine my comments and get back to you, but if you can pass it on, that'd be great.
Hi, Dante, will you unmute Josh Baxter, please?
Hey guys,
Morning,
first of
Josh.
all, thank you. Hey, good morning, good morning. Thank you guys for doing this. A few takeaways. In full disclosure to everybody on the call, I am a citizen in Wedgewood-Houston. I also am a SNAP board member. I was responsible for the petition that brought a lot of people in. We had over 150 members, and we still have 70 people engaged. And I would like, as you can see, we probably went through 3 or 4 questions in an hour. And Lucy, I would like to go back to your point on this very well statement made at the beginning of you wanted feedback and inclusion. And I think the second half of the call has been productive. From an outsider standpoint, you can tell there's hostility there. When William and Eric was speaking, some of your staff rolling your eyes. And that's not what we want from the community involvement. So we have more to discuss. In full disclosure, I'm not in of the UDO as it's written. I thought it was the most productive meeting we had, and you made a good point. We've had a lot of meetings, but most of those meetings have been very restricted as far as our comments, and this has been by far the productive. So the only thing I'm going to leave with is I wish we would consider delaying. We're in a pandemic. We got people involved. Let's get this right. This is great for our community, but there's no reason to rush. And if we can get some more clear answers, I think that's the biggest frustration from many, many people on this call, is they feel they're being blown off. Okay, I'm frank. That's the truth. That they submit stuff and there's no response. We'll look at it and it's never gotten back. And that looks bad on you guys. And it also frustrates our community who's asked in this project. So the only thing I'd like to leave with is I encourage you to engage me more before you submit this UDO.
Well, thank you for your feedback. I've been watching the staff. I don't think anybody,
Yes, ma'am.
anybody
Harriet
would.
When William and Eric were speaking, and that's part of the frustration. Okay, that's part of the road. We got to have feedback. We got to have. You got to have us engaged, and when the contact person is not responsive and rolling their eyes when two people that we've had issues and had questions, it's not a good look, and that's just from a community member. Okay.
Okay. Listen. Harriet has been working morning, noon, and night on this project. I will say a couple things. First, I profoundly regret if there is any suggestion, speaking on behalf of the department, if there is any suggestion that we don't take the feedback seriously. That is absolute. I can assure you that is something we take very seriously at the department. But I will tell you, I'm a little bit confused because when I read the feedback from William and Dwayne, both of them have said we're really close. We just have very minor comments. And that's often what happens in UDOs and when we do detailed plans. And then we hear from other community members saying, every time you defer, you're saying to us that you don't want to move forward on something that we feel passionately about. So I hear what you're saying, but many of your neighbors have said to us, our deferrals are undermining all of the work that the neighborhood has done over the last 2 or 3 years. So I hope you'll hear from me and what I'm saying, that there's a fair amount of disagreement, it seems like, as to whether or not we need more time or not. I haven't actually received that much feedback that we need to allow more time. Most of the comments, again, even from Dwayne and William, have been, we're very, very close. And so I guess I would just put that on the table. I think that the other thing that I would say is that the Planning Commission is made up of people who are deeply invested in our city, and they come from backgrounds that help them to think thoughtfully and independently about some of the issues that you're raising. And I think that having that public discussion in a public forum is really healthy. And so my view is that what is healthy, given where we are, is to allow the commission to weigh in on some of the issues that have been raised here. They're expert in their field. And so the staff can raise and put issues on the table, and then there's an open kind of engagement. And so anybody can raise the concerns and put them on the table, and the commission will opine on them. And so I think that's a good, healthy process. And so if the staff continues to just hold on to it and go through iterative changes, we'll make changes that reflect what one group wants to do. And then another group says, hey, wait a minute, that's not what we wanted. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Forgive me. But I think that having a public hearing is really good.
No, you make.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're making great points, but at the same time, one of the biggest frustrations is this is the first meeting we've had with Wedgewood-Houston, okay, since the deferral. And it's 2 days before the meeting. And part of it was to engage community. So nobody's questioning your staff's dedication, but we also have to accept the feedback that a lot of people do feel that it's not been receptive. And that's an open and honest conversation. So, it's a double-edged sword. Many people want to be involved, and I have not heard one person say, we're not in support of this, but how can we work together? But they're not getting the feedback. And that's something that has to be.
But here's one of the issues. My impression of just a very small handful of feedback that we've gotten, that it's if you won't agree with every one of our points, then the process hasn't been good. Most of the folks who've responded to this project have said there have been a few things we don't agree with and a few things we do, but on the whole, we're generally open to the approach that we're taking. So I'm just trying to understand if it's because I want to
understand who said that it's all or none. No, I've not heard one individual say it's all or none, but at the same time, we're not even having meetings to discuss the minor things. This is the first open, flowing conversation. The issue, seeing other people's questions. Every meeting that we've had, we can't see what our neighbors are asking. This is the first time we've been able to actually talk about things and have a free-flowing conversation. And it's already past time, and we covered 3 things. So yes, the community is frustrated because this has been going on since December. And I do think it's a reasonable point to have us to meet and iron things out and either take it or leave it. But I do think the community should be heard. And as many people as on here, the 70 people that have chimed in, that are saying, hey, we want to be heard, we definitely need to give them a voice and not just saying your complaint is noted and we'll get back to you and then there's no response, or getting the UDO 2 days before we go to planning commission and actually have some time to look at it. We're never going to agree on anything, but the community needs to be heard. Whether where you live here, whether you're a developer, whether you own property here and rent it out, everybody should be heard. And in my opinion, as an individual that lives here, that's not occurred until today.
Well, I'm grateful that you feel like the meeting has been productive. I'm happy to stay on until 10 and hear the more feedback. I do think, having gone through a number of UDOs and detailed design plans, that having a hearing before the Planning Commission can be really clarifying. And it is a way of having folks who have not been involved at the fine level of detail as we have weigh in, ask probing questions. You can hear all of the comments of your residents, because I think you as a community leader will know that there can also become exhaustion. I mean, people get exhausted with a process, and I don't want that to happen either. And I'll sometimes hear that, and I have heard that on this project, that when we deferred it, it was, it felt like we were slowing the process down and slowing progress, and that was also on the other side of it, frustrating to some of your neighbors. And so I think that a hearing before the Planning Commission can be really good. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're done. It just means that it's a good opportunity to say, here's where we are, here are the issues, and the commissioners will ask very probing questions on those issues. And then we know what we need to work on. So I just wanted to reassure you that carrying it to the Planning Commission doesn't mean that the staff is saying, hey, we're done. It means that I think we've reached a point at which it would be more productive to have those voices weigh in. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm being too wordy. I don't mean to be. But let me ask if there's any, let's see, Harriet, what other question? Who else has their hands up? Was that a happy? Okay.
Will you unmute Donald Jenkins, please?
Hey guys, can you hear me? Hello? You got me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank y'all. Hey, I can't imagine, honestly, what you guys, I understand and do appreciate all your work. Please, please don't hear anything that, sounds combative, because, I've lived in the neighborhood since 2007. I think if there is a frustration, and maybe in response to your, you don't hear a lot of feedback. I know, just speaking for myself and past experience, a lot of the stuff I don't do for a living and don't understand. So, I do refer to people like Smallman and other people in the industry. So I think they're a culmination of a lot of people's feedback, because in the past, when I've tried, I don't understand the communication channels or process. So therefore I go to someone who maybe have that, that channel open. And over the years, I think, I've spoken at many of council meetings and fairground boards and racetracks, and it's just, I think the frustration is something is said and maybe assumed, and then, by the time it's time to do something, it's like, oh, by the way, no, you can't. Or, it's happened to me multiple times over the years, even with SPs, where on Hamilton, I live at 540, and, we had, plans to do something that was really good and congruent with what the street was already doing. And I have the text thread with Colby that's like, nope, everything's on hold or freeze. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm a homeowner. Like, I'm not a developer. I built in 07 in my 20s when, I really couldn't afford it at the time. And then 2008, 9, 10. A lot of those years were, just getting by, and I think the frustration for me sometimes is there's so many decisions that are made, or maybe promises, or maybe even assumptions, right? That, okay, and then it comes time to do it, and it's like, nope, you can't. Well, this changed. Well, you have to pay for sidewalks now, and then driveways, nope. And I'm like, okay, nothing looks congruent, because there's things already happening, and now you're saying I can't even do what's right next door to me, and I know those are specific examples, but I think that's my fear or concern, in that I understand trying to preserve, but if there's things that have already been done, right or wrong, and then all of a sudden kind of punish individual homeowners that's been there. I know my neighbor Heath has lived there longer than I have, and we talk about it all the time. We're like, we lived in the neighborhood 15. He's been there 20 something years, and wait, that that's been done, and that's been done, and now all of a sudden I can't. And not understanding all the rules and why and kind of how the process works. It's kind of like the boy that cried wolf. You get to the point where you're like, I don't know, you kind of check out, I guess, and just like, it just feels like you're a little bit out of control, because nobody knows exactly. I've had conversations over the years and emails and stuff, but they're not there anymore. And, so this is pre-COVID, and not that this is a pandemic thing. I think it's just a difficult process when you don't do it day in, day out, to understand the best way. And then, by the time we do hear it, or it goes to planning, or it's going to a vote, we have 2 days, and I'm like, but wait, what? And then it's like, well, you had your chance, or you had your time, you could have done this. And it was like, but okay. And, that's, I think, the frustrating part. And, I think it gets to the point where, if you just don't do this type of work, but you are a homeowner, a lot of people are trying to, kind of make it happen in their own lives and careers that are so different than I know what you guys are working on day in, day night. And that's great. So a lot of us do give our feedback to the people who are able to read and study and actually know, what's happening. And then as the homeowner, we just it's like, I feel like sometimes we just have to accept whether it was good for us or whether it was bad for us, and it was like, well, if I'd have known this 6 months ago, I would have done something different. And I think what I'm trying to say is let's come to agreement. I think the reason why I'm leery of hey, this UDO is this, and then there's always going to be submit for special, approval or whatever. And that process is not only time consuming, it's costly. And, just as a homeowner, and I think there's this assumption that, oh, well, developers make all the money and, they're doing whatever. I go, costs are just passed on to the homeowners. And there's property value that's been my longest investment, and not easy investments, years where it was like, I don't know if we'll make it. And, we've come through a lot of times in the neighborhood, and I just feel like every time something happens, I try to voice, and really it's just a Okay, thanks for your 2 minutes. And then decisions are made. And that really affects, 15-year investment of mine as to what I can or cannot do. So I think that's an overall thing. I just want to make sure that the process is easier because we know things always change. Whatever is, I think the reason why it's so important to get this right is so it doesn't affect bigger problems and things in the future. And I'm not sitting here saying that everything's right or wrong in it because, to be quite honest, I haven't read the whole thing. And if I did, I wouldn't understand half of it. So I want to make sure that at least there are things that are agreed upon so it makes it easier in the future and not just like a crapshoot where it's like, well, maybe you can, maybe you can't next year. It depends. We'll have to see. And things always change. I understand that. Over the years, though, I've been multiple times about to do something, had great opportunity to do it, had neighbor support. And then all of a sudden, like, well, yeah, we can't do that anymore. And I'm like, well, it's done right next door to me. Like my next door neighbor can do it. Yeah, things changed. Okay. So
No, that's really good. I mean, I hear that from residents, and I think the fact that you're engaged and asking questions is the right thing. I mean, for a city that is changing as quickly as ours, you're right to be asking those questions. Do you want to send me an email with, are there some specific issues that are of concern and we can go through the
Sure.
UDO and look at those? Because I hear what you're saying, that sometimes you don't even know what questions to ask. I mean, this is our business, but it's your neighborhood, right? And so it's got to work for neighbors. And so if you wanted to send Harriet,
Sure.
Joni, and me like a note, I want to know about setbacks, or, sometimes this is a game I play in
Sure.
my mind. Sometimes when I'm looking at UDOs, what is the worst in my mind? What is the worst thing that can happen that I'm most concerned about? And then I look to see if that would result in the standards. And so that might be another way of approaching it. And I know that's kind of a weird, I haven't even told the staff I do that. But you might, or what is it I really want? And is that
Sure.
likely to happen? And so if you wanted to just send me like 4 scenarios that in your brain, like from your perspective, here's what I'm most worried about. We'll look and see if that would happen. And then we can talk about it. So reach out.
Yeah, I will.
Send me a
I've
note
definitely
and-
have those. Yeah, absolutely. And I have the ones that, and I'm trying not to be selfish here and go, this is what I want for my house either. I do care about the other owners and the neighborhood in general, because I'm a local. I've lived here 18 years and I was in the neighborhood since 2007. There's been a lot of progress that I really feel like is good and was needed, but by no means am I trying to push people out. I'm a big supporter of affordable housing and all those things. At the same time, a lot of the neighborhood changes. And as the neighborhood has changed and the new people that are in there, I feel that the overall census that I get is that the progress and what has been happening is wanted. And I realize that there is still a small percentage that don't want it to change. And I feel what happens is the people that obviously are feeling the most pain, whatever that is, make the most noise. And I understand that that's the feedback that you probably hear, and I get it. And it might be because, well, the other people, it's just not their focus and they're doing other things, and it doesn't mean they're not interested. We do talk about it and we do give feedback, and then we try to find that point of contact for me in particular and some other people in the neighborhood. It is Smallman and Dwayne and them because that's what they do, right? And it's easier because I know I can call or text them, right? So a lot of feedback does filter within the neighborhood through them, okay? And so I haven't heard a lot of people say, yeah, we want to keep when I moved there in 2007, it was a different neighborhood, but I can say that most people probably now wouldn't say, yeah, we want it to stay just like it is, character-wise, because it's a lot better character now, and we were loving the growth in the process. I understand that there are growing pains with growth. I totally understand that, and there are some things that do need to be limited and people that do need to be protected. I'm all about that. I also want to at least bring up that as new people come into the neighborhood, that their voice matters too, because they're now part of the neighborhood and they have different opinions as well than the original people that, have been there 20, 30, 40 years. I get that. That was the biggest thing in the racetrack and the fairgrounds and all of that. I so many proposals and so many things. And then I understand that there is always, and part of governing is sacrifice, and you can't please everybody. I totally understand that. I just want to make sure that because the people that aren't always involved and they're doing other things with their lives and it's not their main priority to, understand that a lot of times their voice isn't heard and it might be their fault. But it doesn't mean that they don't, have it. And I think the biggest consensus I haven't heard a whole lot, and I've lived there so long with so many neighbors saying, yeah, we want to keep the character. And then I feel like the feedback we get from you guys is like, all you hear is you want to, keep the character. And I'm like, I don't hear that at all, And I'm not saying that this should be one big brick, condominium in the neighborhood. That's not my point. Just more congruency. I think that and whether it's right or wrong, if you have a street that has, the houses that maybe you guys don't want anymore, but to say you can't anymore, I don't think that betters the neighborhood if it's not congruent, and then you're also saying that one property owner that could have lived there and goes, well, they probably got the kids' college fund or retirement and I can't. And I've invested and lived here just as long, and the rules changed and now I'm being punished for it or for whatever reason. And it's not that I think that everybody that's trying to do this has bad intentions. I don't think any of y'all go, we're going to screw them. I know that. But it is a concern when you're like, wow, I understand maybe going forward, there's certain things so we keep it from getting here. I understand too that y'all are willing to hear one-offs. It's been my experience in the past though, when you want to do that, it's a process. Like submitting for SP is not just a email. You need plans and you need money and then it's still not a guarantee to get approved, so it's like,
Well, SPs are rezoning, right? So
and I don't even know if I'm using the right terminology, honestly.
No, you are. No, that's a really good point. No, hang on. I think you're making a really good point. Because there's a degree, you're asking really good questions about how responsive is the government going to be able to be
right
to an issue that comes up. And if you want to rezone your property, that is a deal. And it should be. That guy's got to go to council and have 3 readings. You got to get neighborhood support. I mean, there's a whole host of things. I think what Joni was suggesting earlier is that there is a process where we can review changes to UDOs that don't require council action, that are more administrative in nature, or may at the most go to a planning commission meeting. Joni, do this if you don't like what I'm saying. But we don't want to make it onerous. I mean, we want to make the decisions that are transformative in nature. Those should require bigger reviews. Decisions that have site-specific issues that may be variances to a set standard go through a different process, and that's pretty routine. And I think the department has like I said, a kind of a proven track record of being able to moderate those things in a way. I mean, I think if you just talk to folks, you'll hear that we try to be pretty reasonable and thoughtful. But having said all of that, I just want, if there are some specific issues that you have questions about, send Harriet and Joni a note. We'll schedule a call and we'll walk through those, because I don't want to, if residents feel like they just don't, there's pieces that don't make any sense, I want to make sure that we're talking those through. But there are a couple of other folks with hands. Yeah.
And I will definitely do that. I do, if you don't mind, just because I'd like to pass it back to Smallman, because I know a lot of that is, he's the one, Dwayne, they walk through this and they go, all right, here's what it means, right? And here's what we can and cannot do. Here's what we need to do. And that conversation I do have with them. I'm not trying to, go around or anything. I just feel like it's easier.
You're not. Actually, what I'd like to do though is make sure we've called on everybody, because we only have, so I want to make sure everyone's had a chance to speak. So Harriet, are there any others who have their hands raised who haven't had an opportunity to speak? If not, I'm happy to go back to William.
I don't think so. I think we called on, my only question was, maybe Dante, if you could unmute Jeremy Kelton. I can't remember if it was Jeremy or Clay who spoke earlier.
Maybe, we could
it's
ask
Clay.
everyone to take their hands off or put their hands down if you've spoken, and then that way we can make sure that everyone has had a chance.
It wasn't me. I spoke earlier. This is Jeremy. So thank you.
Okay, so maybe Dante, if you could unmute Clay Kelton, please.
Hello, hello. Hey,
Hi, Clay.
hey everybody. I appreciate everybody's patience with this. I know we're over time, and I'm going to be brief. You know, and part of this, I do, you know, echo the sentiments of Donald and Josh as well. You know, I feel like we're an hour and a half into a meeting and we're still discussing, you know, things that probably could have been handled a lot quicker and more efficiently if we could, if it wasn't a closed. I mean, I haven't even been able to see an open chat in this today, so it's like we're just not getting to things. But that's just a little bit of a frustration. But at the same time, I appreciate everybody's efforts here. I know y'all have been in this for a while. My specific question, it relates to page 12 of the UDO. And here's the thing, my fear is all the existing houses in between Wedgewood and Southgate, I guess that's 2B. The way the language appears to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hoping I'm wrong, but we now have to put an 16 to 18 foot driveway in. Well, all the existing houses, if they're not far enough off your side setback, does this mean that you can't build a driveway in front of the facade of the house? So does that mean you have to now tear down any house in order to put a dadu in the backyard or a small house in the backyard? Because you can't have it both ways if there's an existing house there, according to this language. So am I right in thinking that? I feel like this could affect all those existing houses that people want to keep, but they also want to add a unit in the backyard. Does that make sense? Like, unless your house.
Harriet, can you address?
Sure. So this again goes back to the kind of conversations we've had with Public Works about driveway widths and their requirements. And so the standard, as it is currently written in the document, is based off conversations we've had with Public Works that require a 15 to 24 foot driveway for a duplex or triplex property. I mean, in terms of, having to tear down the original house if you don't have that setback, I mean, to me, that seems like something that, maybe we would be able to discuss with Public Works and, in a modification process or that kind of thing, if they were unwilling to do something that was more narrow. But I think, this driveway issue is definitely one that keeps coming up. And so I feel like, as Lucy mentioned earlier, Public Works will be at the Planning Commission meeting, and this is something that would be a good conversation for us to have, because we in planning are also supportive of more narrow driveway width. But this is a standard that is that's a Public Works issue that we kind of have to comply with. So that's kind of my understanding of where it stands.
I got you. And I hear you on the Public Works thing. I guess my question is, like, we could also just change this UDO language to where driveways are allowed, to cut in front of the actual elevation, the facade of the house, and then it would be a non-issue in my mind, because right now the language says no driveways or parking pads are permitted in front of the primary facade. So if that wasn't in there, then you could potentially do your driveway, meet the Public Works standard and get around the house and keep the existing house and not incentivize everybody to scrape their house or to not add an additional affordable unit in the backyard or any unit in the backyard. So it seems problematic to me unless I'm, again, I've spent so much time kind of going back through this, and it's like, it's hard to understand all these things. And, I appreciate the time that William and Dwayne especially have spent thinking through these things, because all these things do matter. The tiny things in here matter. And I feel like some of that's getting lost because we can't communicate very well about it. So I'm sorry, I'm just a little frustrated by that. But am I thinking right though that as it's written, if my house is does not have 18 feet from the side setback of space, I can't go add a back unit in any of my properties? Am I thinking correctly about that?
I would say yes, as it's currently written, unless you have alley access.
Okay. Well, then I'm not in favor of this UDO as it's written. Then I guess I just got to say that I like a lot of the things in here, but that to me is a pretty big deal, and it's going to affect a lot of people. And we're just now talking about it right now, so I'm not in favor of this as it's written.
So I think my suggestion. Oh, sorry. Who's talking?
Sorry, Lucy, it's Joni. I had to go remote here, so I'm probably on your screen twice, but I just wanted to chime in and say, I think that that's a really important point to make, and maybe something that has come up several times in this conversation is the addressing of existing conditions. When you're trying to use an existing structure, or you're trying to be part of an existing situation, there's some built-in understandings through the zoning code and through public works requirements that we know that we could maybe be a little more specific about in the UDO of when these standards get triggered. So if you're using, if you want to retain an existing structure, you want to retain an existing driveway, and being strictly compliant with these standards would preclude that, we can talk about those triggers. I think there's a way to be a little more conscientious of existing conditions when we talk about how the standards get triggered. I think I'm talking in circles, but I hope you follow what I'm saying there.
Yeah, I think I do. I just want the UDO to reflect that this is a problem, I guess. Because right now, right now I can go build, a dadu in my backyard. Well, once this passes, at least on multiple properties that I own, I'm not going to be able to do that. And if I'm a homeowner, I may not even realize that right's about to get stripped from me unless I have 18 feet between the side of my house and my property line, which most houses don't currently. So
yeah, I hear you loud and clear on that. And I think we would acknowledge an existing condition, but we can be specific in the UDO and make sure that it's in writing that we're acknowledging the existing condition.
That would be great if we can. That's one of those modifications that I feel like, William sent out a thing with some other red line items, and that wasn't, my point's a little different than his, but there's a lot of little things in here that, man, it would make a difference in a good way. So I would encourage everybody to consider what he sent out here.
Clay, I got that this morning, so I have not been able to go through his comments before the meeting, but and I prefer this method anyway, just hearing directly from folks. The way you pose the question and raise the issue is really helpful, because what helps us is understanding whether you're talking about an existing condition or something within the UDO and the impact that you're concerned about. And that makes it very easy and productive for us to address and look at. And so I guess what I would say is, I think that I think that a commission meeting is a productive way of putting things on the table and having the commissioners ask the questions. And if there's more work to be done on a specific area, like if you had just included what you just said in testimony, that will help them be productive in their responses. And so what we'll do is review the materials William sent over and any other feedback that we get And then we can have another follow-up discussion if that's the most appropriate way to move forward. And so I just want to, I know we've gone 30 minutes over, so I want to thank everybody for their time today. And you know, as I said, I'm committed to continuing to work through this process. We want a great tool that works for the community. And so I thank you so much again for your time. Harriet and Joni, let's have a conversation about how to follow back up with the red line that we got today. Like I said, I haven't seen it. And we can follow back up with this group if that works for everyone. So I really appreciate your time this morning, and I'm sorry for going over. I do see the Q&A. I don't know, I'm not technically fabulous, but I'm happy to copy and paste it and send that to the group. Would y'all like for us to do that? Would that be good? We're happy to do that. I know there's a way. Let's get with ITS so we can copy and paste, and then just send that feedback to everyone, and we can add some answers to that. Yes, Harriet? Okay.
Yeah, Dontre, will you please send us a transcript of the Q&A? For some reason, I've been unable to respond to people's questions during this meeting. So if you could send us that transcript, that'd be great.
So Harriet, I would go ahead and respond when you get that transcript, and then that way people can see the questions and then the answer, and then we can circle back up with everyone, and that way they'll see what was asked during the Q&A.
Okay. This is Dontre with ITS. If I'm not mistaken, I won't be able to populate that information and send it until the meeting actually concludes.
That's totally fine. Just send it to planning staff, and then we can send it to all the neighbors.
Okay. All right.
Okay, well, thank you again. I'm sorry for going over. I'm very grateful for all of your time, and we look forward to continuing our discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.